I suppose that's what makes this special. It's kind of bootstrapped at the same stage. We kind of see the final potential and you go, there's actually heart behind the product. Look, it's worth pushing hard for things that we believe in. And I think that's where technology is going to be at its best.
This episode, we get to talk to Matt and Subha, who are both involved with the technology side of making the difference a reality. Matt Lambie is the group CTO of the Singaporean fintech company Funding Societies. He's had over 20 years' experience in the tech industry, and he's now also the vital role of CTO at The Difference, using his experience to help bring our app to life. Subha Naidu has worked in an expansive career in both creative and advertising. He was the creative director of Codigo, which was Singapore's most awarded independent mobile app development company. Currently, he's the managing director of Tapnology, which is a tech solution product company with the goal of getting more taps, more clicks and more touches. Thank you so much for being here. So we're really wanting to make the difference a discussion about the changes that everyone can make in society, from the little to the big things, and we're wanting to interview game changers and change makers. So you guys fit into that mould in both ways, really. So Matt, I'm interested in talking to you a little bit about your background and what brought you here.
Sure. So I think it all kind of traces back to high school, was where I first was exposed to computers, which for most people my age is a little bit later than usual. It was sort of in my mid-teens that I started to program, and then took myself to a university degree focusing on computer science here in Perth. After graduation, I straight out of uni started a small business with one of my friends from university, and grew that over the period of about 15 years to a reasonable sized organisation. And that was up until about 4 years ago that I was part of that organisation. And we worked predominantly with small businesses and startups before they were sort of labelled startups. And then towards the end of my time with that organisation, I was looking at big data and analytics for some very large multinationals. So quite a different broad spectrum of experiences.
And why computers? Why tech?
I always liked the idea that computers were really fast but really dumb, and I was a bit brighter but not terribly fast. And so I think the combination of my brain and a computer's processing speed meant that we could achieve more together rather than without computers. So I've seen technology as an enabler rather than a creator, and I think that it unlocks some of the potential that humans have, and means that we can amplify our capabilities.
And Subha, what brought you into being the head of a successful app development company, Tapnology? Can you tell us a little bit about that?
I'm still working on the success some days. Yeah, I suppose didn't come from a technology background at all either, and in fact love all things analog. So, vinyl and classic cars. My previous life in advertising and creative stuff, I guess, took me to places like working in Singapore and New York. And I think it was in those places that you could really see the effect of digital platforms, especially mobile, right? And America especially, where you could see how much more people were getting out of life by communicating and ordering, and the convenience and all those things that they were getting out of simple utility apps and bits and pieces. And so I think what was exciting for me was that creative skew kind of overlaid with the technology felt like a much more exciting, future, as opposed to advertising Heineken beer and dumb stuff like that. So
Heineken does sound like a fun thing.
Actually, it was pretty
advertise.
Good. Yeah, that was really good. But not good for the health. But yeah, actually M&M's and Heineken, they were my clients. It's terrible. But I think that mixture of creativity plus technology was something that was lacking at that time, and I felt was something hopefully we could kind of add. And then that grew from there. We could kind of see through just very simple apps how much of a change you could make in society or culture, or and definitely the things that you're doing now with The Difference.
What was the reason that you got out of advertising?
We did an advertising project for Heineken in Singapore. Actually, this was the first one that really crystallized it for me, and it was basically it was like a 48 LED screen Christmas tree, and Facebook apps were all the rage at that time, and it was all around people in Southeast Asia getting disconnected because they'd socialised through social media. So this was a way you could put all your friends onto this giant social Christmas tree, what we called it, and then come down and with those friends and, you know, with a beer, you could kind of have a look at it as it did this animation of your profile pictures. I don't know, it was really exciting to kind of see it work, and the amount of, I guess, exposure, that kind of social connection and the positivity that it garnered was a big one. And so I was like, oh, we've got to do that again. You know, we've got to try and do that in different ways and see how else we can kind of connect, especially for people or platforms that need it a bit more, that can make the world a bit better.
I think that technology, mobile technology in particular, is a great way to close some of the gaps that we see in society. And I think the prevalence and availability of mobile devices now means that it's becoming an expectation rather than a nice to have. Once they're in the pockets of the vast majority of the world's population, then the opportunities that unlocks, and whether it's around charitable giving like we're doing with The Difference, whether it's making sure that there's access to banking and finance services for everybody, whether that's through traditional means or cryptocurrencies and sort of more modern approaches. As long as we can facilitate access to it and we can educate around the use of it, then it means the society that we can be part of and that we can help to build will have bigger opportunities for its members.
Working with clients constantly in your regular workplace, what are some of the projects from the past or present that have stood out to you?
There's been a couple of instances at my previous role. I was working for a fintech aggregator in Singapore, and the two that come into mind of being extremely valuable and me being able to identify that. One of them was the development of a design guideline, a design standard, which didn't necessarily fall inside the remit of my team and my organisation, but was a part of a project that we were implementing and facilitating. And I liked that it drove standardisation and it drove consistency throughout the interfaces that we were building. So I think the drive was foreseeing the value that viewing a standardized customer journey can drive. It's hard enough to get somebody to use your application. It's then even harder to get them to continue to come back to it and to continue to use it. And if we're making choices, especially at the design phases and design levels, that are not supporting an easy transaction or an easy experience, then we really have no right to expect users to keep coming back. And so I could see the value that having a consistent design standard could bring. There was also, again, this is a little more technical, but there was the transition from monolithic applications to a more service-oriented architecture or a microservice architecture. And I think that mindset shift in the startup world that we've seen over the last sort of 5 or so years, something that's been present in more enterprise software development for a period of time, but it allows us to scale out individual components and functionality of the applications in various ways to meet different customer needs. Because we can't predict necessarily the parts of our application that are going to be most heavily used, I think the microservices approach means that we can kind of delay having to make choices around that. We just tell it to scale accordingly. Now, again, this is not front-facing. It's not really sexy to talk about, but the mindset that we're putting into how we build our software and how we service our customers and the experiences that we deliver as a result of that and the journeys they can take, I think all can be traced back to some of the software architecture choices and whether that's going to serve the customer in the best way. Certainly
the ones that excite me are a couple of the health-based platforms we built. The first one was Plano in Singapore, which was through the Singapore Eye Research Institute and Dr. Mo, so a guy from Alfred Hospital here, researcher. And these guys came up with this idea of monitoring or figuring out a way of having a more positive ground rules around children's device use. And so they used all the research that they had, and to kind of formulate these rough guidelines as to how kids should use their devices, because it was a tendency of, holding the thing up too close to their face, or using it for prolonged periods of time, and it was resulting in kind of early onset myopia and things like that. So we came up with this app, which was quite fun and colourful, kind of stayed in the background so they could use whatever other apps they wanted to use, and would send alerts through this little character to if they were using the device too long, if they used it past their bedtime, or if they were kind of holding it too close to their face, plus kind of push notifications to prompt them to or reward them based on positive device use and stuff like that. Really exciting, and it was an interesting challenge functionally as well as kind of, I guess, socially, to see how people would use it and the benefits parents would get from it. There's a current project that we're working on, which is all around people that have had laryngectomies, trying to build confidence in them to get them speaking again. So Dr. Thomas Moore's based in London, just a legendary dude, and he came up with this idea of putting together a choir for people that have undergone this as a means of therapy. And that really got a lot of positivity, got PR on, I went on BBC, and they do a lot of these tours with this group. And so we got talking about, well, how do you kind of affect a larger group and globally, as opposed to just the people that there. And so this app was kind of formulated with beatbox training as well as kind of ways of connecting with other people, such that they could slowly build confidence in being able to, make gestures and noises in a cool way. Sounds pretty awesome, and the challenges kind of get bigger as they go. And then using technology like kind of breath into the microphone as ways of, controlling your pitch as well as your, the output of breath as the exercise means. But again, just a fun project of which it's just a real positive kind of vibe and helping people out in a different way, or using technology to help. Those two were the coolest for me, I think they just the positive effects they had, or the potential of positive effects that they can do is just through technology was exciting.
So this question's to each of you personally. What do you think is more important, the advancement of technology or the functionality it plays in people's lives?
It's always talking to people, people that have had the issues, or parents that, don't know how to deal with their kids when, using devices, or become the bad person because they snatch the device out of their kid's hands and the kid starts crying. They're the most affected. And you feel it when you speak to them. So that requirements gathering of actually doing focus groups and speaking to the people that are going to use it, that definitely adds to the, that personalisation of the product. It doesn't become an app anymore. It becomes really something that facilitates a benefit. And so as soon as you kind of start thinking more through insights as opposed to functionality, then the product becomes much better at the end, because you've got firmly in your mind exactly who that person's going to be that'll use it. So, yeah, I guess that's the thing. I always talk to the focus groups. I always talk to the people that are the end user. It will invariably make for a better product.
In recent years, the technology and design industries have focused heavily on being people-centric rather than technology-centric. What importance does this play designing experiences for users rather than letting technology dictate our experience?
I think technology advancing just for the sake of it advancing is never going to be a successful outcome. Making a better version of something that we already have today doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to be successful. We see this in the app marketplace daily. There's better versions of every app that we use out there, but they were made and maybe not marketed correctly, or didn't have the budgets behind them, or they're just ultimately not successful. So I think technology will always advance, and it seems to be part of this human drive to try and improve everything about it. What's more interesting, though, is how it's applied and the changes that it can drive, and the impact that we can have with that technology. So I think look at something like self-driving cars. I think the computer vision and the mechatronic engineering that goes into being able to build something like that's really interesting, and certainly beyond my capabilities. But I think the the function that it delivers is perhaps even more significant. If we have self-driving cars, it means we don't need necessarily humans to be piloting these vehicles. So that time can be used and spent elsewhere. And I think that anything we can do that either gives us more time or allows us to utilize the time that we have already dedicated to a specific task better is ultimately the optimization that we should be seeking in our lives. And I think that the average person on the street today is a lot busier than they might have been 20 years ago or certainly 50 years ago. And I think technology is ultimately the root cause of that busyness. But we've all got a lot more on the go, and I think a lot of people are living lives now that are more fulfilling than perhaps we were 50 years ago or 100 years ago. So I think that it's a bit of a yin-yang sort of style. The technology advances and then we find good uses for it, and those good uses in turn drive additional enhancements. But not everything that gets developed has immediate social benefit or immediate social value. Sometimes it takes a long while for us to figure it out. I think alternative currencies is a great example. We've had Bitcoin around for over a decade, and it's delivered some banking capabilities as well as all the other blockchain benefits to communities, but we still haven't seen it hit a level where it's ubiquitous. I think it's quite likely that something in that realm will unlock banking and financial capabilities for every user. What we might be seeing now is the stepping stones to get there.
In recent years, the technology and design industries have focused heavily on being people-centric rather than technology-centric. What importance does this play designing experiences for users rather than letting technology dictate our experience?
I mean, quite greatly from when we started building to where we are now. And kind of, I guess, related to your previous question, where previously there were best practices that were based on the technology, whereas now it's all around, well, how do we make the customer's life as easy as possible. I think the more diligence and effort you put in on that front side of the build, again, invariably the better the product's going to be at the end. Finding out or digging up those user insights and finding ways to, I guess, creatively make it as simple or easy as possible. And that's through multiple factors of like reducing the number of screens, I guess the tangible ones, but also the language that you use in onboarding processes, figuring out ways of, having to bypass complicated steps. Will mean that more people have a chance of using it. Consider each screen a barrier to entry, where you're going to get people dropping off. Those kind of, apart from the determined user, we now have to be more, I guess, diligent than ever to do the homework, go and speak to the people, the end user, map those, all the different, variations that could potentially be the outcomes, and then use those learnings as in a more kind of rapid prototyping technique, such that we can kind of test and then retest and then change, optimize, and then I guess you kind of look at this thing as a never an end product, but varying phases of products that'll always optimize as we figure out more information and as new technologies come in that we can kind of make the product better.
That was really fun with the difference when we did the UI UX testing with these focus groups, and having a look at their feedback per screen and like really kind of curating the experience to them, and then employing that design thinking as we went forward, as we tested, as we developed the app. And it was great to get that feedback, like how much of them enjoyed the experience, how many of them wanted one font changed or, didn't like a particular colour. But then if you're catering the whole product to somebody's experience, you're going to obviously create a better experience and a better product. So I think it's kind of the future of the industry, is like taking that level of understanding and being very granular with what it is that you're trying to create for people. Because if you're just creating something that's good technology but doesn't have the person in mind or your people that you're trying to service, then it might just be empty technology essentially, and it won't give that intended impact.
In the way an app or a brand presents itself, imagery, copy and that kind of invisible thread of flow that you kind of take the user journey on, it all makes a huge difference. And I think the best apps for me are always the ones that all the smarts are kind of hidden behind this veil of fun and frivolity and colours and chicken wings. But the underlying thing is, does the user kind of feel, I shouldn't even say user, does the person feel like they're kind of getting some form of convenience, reward or entertainment out of the product that you're actually putting forward to them? Because forget about the build. Everyone gets so focused on, look, we've got all these phases to do and, we got to meet the milestones and all that kind of stuff. And it tends to overshadow, well, once it's out there, then what, and actually the job starts once people start using the apps. And that's a trap. That's a trap that everybody kind of falls into, that, again, you talked about those challenges or hurdles. The build is a very small process of what is, giving birth to something that lives in different varying ways, and you just constantly got to manage and talk and discuss, look at analytics, see how you can change it, make it better, and that's success, I guess.
From both of your perspectives, how would you describe where the industry is at, and how would you rank the health of it?
So there's obviously key locations around the world that have become technology hotspots. I think we've got Silicon Valley for the longest time has been right up there. We've seen similar scenes in New York, and in financial markets have always been based in Hong Kong and Germany, and manufacturing comes out of China. And I think it makes sense for different locations to specialize industry in certain ways. Technology is one of those deal breakers, though. I think it can really disrupt the thinking that goes on in a community. If you have access to technology and you can convert your ideas into an app or a website or some way of delivering that idea, then your location is a lot less significant. Now, this is true, I think, from a startup, get-going, bootstrap sort of mentality. And I think a lot of the success stories that came out of Silicon Valley of two guys in a garage kind of that still exists. That opportunity still exists. Where it gets a little trickier is when you want to progress beyond that sort of initial stage. And then it's an area that's almost exclusively dependent on investment. And different locations around the world have different access to investor funds. So if you're trying to launch a startup, the validity of the idea might not change across geography or region, but your access to funding will. I think being able to compare my experiences for 15 years here in Perth versus the last 4 years up in Singapore, almost chalk and cheese in terms of access to Series A funding or seed investment funding. And I think any startup that's looking at a specific region should be considering what access to investment they have. That's what's necessary to turn a great idea into a great idea that people are actually able to access. Because as sort of Subha said, the development of the app or the idea is only the tip of the iceberg. Then there's the marketing and the continual development, and the best software projects never really finish. They move into the next maintenance mode, or we start thinking about version 2.0 or feature enhancements and security fixes, and there's a continual rolling work stream. But I think it's as much as there's still a lot of buzz in the industry around the agile practices, I think in many ways we think it's restricted to purely the sprints that we execute to deliver the software, but there needs to be a broader thinking around the entire life cycle of the product, from the ideation and the formulation of the concept all the way through to decommissioning, when it's taken out of the App Store and services are turned off. People don't tend to look that far down the road, and I think that it'd be sensible to weave that into the conversation early on. I think the Perth versus the eastern states of Australia or versus Southeast Asia, very different climates and very different opportunities and access. But people are smart and they find a way. And the communities that I've seen around startups have changed a lot. I think say a decade ago, I was critical of some of the approaches where incubators would run startup weekends, and then a bunch of really smart computer science students or design students would get together and have some great ideas. And it seemed like there was a group of potential investors sort of skirting around the outsides, waiting to pick off the good ideas and pick them up for next to nothing. And taking advantage of that weekend, 48 hours, we're just going to drink coffee and eat pizza and work on an idea. I think that's changed a lot though, and I think that the communities that are building these apps now and the students that have got these ideas are a lot smarter about it. And I think the communities have matured. Doesn't necessarily mean there's still same access to investment opportunities across the globe, but you can get your idea launched anywhere, but it will more than likely need some kind of level of investment though to become successful at the next stage. And I think that that'll be a consideration for me around where I was to base a startup.
Mm-hmm. And how would you summarise the greatest challenges then? Would it be in the funding area?
I definitely think so, yeah. The best idea is meaningless if you can't convince someone to help you fund it. And the presumption is that not all of us have access to a source of unlimited funds, right? If we did, then it would be great, and we could build all the applications that we wanted and try out all these startup ideas, and if they succeeded or failed, it wouldn't make any difference. The reality is, though, that these ideas do need funding behind them to become successful. So it's either going to come from an individual or it's going to come from a group of individuals or a group of groups. And I think the maturity that we're seeing in places like Silicon Valley or throughout Southeast Asia more recently towards this sort of investment is a lot higher than what I've seen in Australia and certainly in Perth in particular.
I think people have become almost addicted to low-cost labour, and that makes, I guess, all these questions around doing due diligence and lengthening timelines to ensure for a better product in the later stages is a hard conversation when there's opportunities of getting things up and for $1,000 or whatever. I mean, there's plenty. I can tell you so many stories of those, but there are. I think the awesomeness of democratization of ideas, people being able to put something together really quickly, send it out to market, and in some cases see it fly is just awesome. And I don't think anyone has had that flexibility or achievability ever before on a global scale as well. What Matt's saying about everything kind of hinging to money is still very much there, and I suppose that's what makes this special. It's kind of bootstrapped at the same stage. We kind of see the final potential and you go, there's actually heart behind the product. When it is out there and it's working, that's when it's going to be a great case study to show, look, it's worth pushing hard for things that we believe in. And I think that's where technology is going to be at its best. I think when people kind of take away that, how much money can we make out of it, or what's the investor discussion, or what's our return, and it becomes how can we really help the people that need the help, or how can we really add convenience and make human life better. I think that'll be the special part, and I think it doesn't matter what the technology is going to be. If it kind of stems from a human insight and has the possibility to reach large numbers of people to help those people, then it's a winner. At the moment, I don't think we're quite there yet. I think things like blockchain will be great. That transparency, especially in the markets where there hasn't been any ledger-based stuff, or they haven't been able to control where the money flows to, and there's no audit trails around that. I think the potential there is immense. But again, I guess the sooner people kind of go, all right, well, let's just build this thing to see how we can really help those communities that have, suffered from people moving to big cities or trying to, extract as much money as possible. All those all those businesses that have fallen by the wayside of technology, you kind of want to fund that back. You know, you want some reverse engineering to kind of see all those positive things about farming and, you know, the video store. I don't know why I missed the video store, but yeah, there's some things that are kind of, you know, human truths or nostalgia that we really cherish that now have kind of fallen by the wayside. And at times I just wonder whether we're better for it or not. The convenience might be better, but our happiness might not be. And I think there's a slow shift towards how much money can we extract to how we're going to make things better, which I think is the real exciting part.
How do you see the non-for-profit and humanitarian sectors benefiting from the industry in its current state?
Again, I think it gets broken down to just access, right? And I think in many cases, these services or this information might be available to a community or to a group of users, but in many cases it's not. And I think for us living in capital cities and drinking our lattes and catching our public transport that's, you know, regular and on time, it's easy to forget that there's a whole group, a whole section of this world that doesn't have access to those sorts of services or that kind of convenience. And technology and apps are a great way, the only way to really penetrate some of those like really difficult and challenging situations. We have a look at some of the political unrest happening in Hong Kong and seeing how technology has made it safer for some of those political protests to be carried out. And I think, you know, regardless of which side you sort of come down on in that debate, the argument is pretty clear that technology is playing a part. Now, whether it's helping protesters organise and stay safe, or whether it's allowing users to make philanthropic donations and participate in a community that's bigger than just their immediate network. It's the underlying principle of a computer in your pocket that's connected to everything that humanity has ever learnt and bothered to record. I think the power of that is still not understood by those of us that wield these on a daily basis. I think we'll be able to do more of what we want to do faster and more secure and more reliable and without as much consideration. I think, you know, when I was a child, if you wanted to listen to a song on the radio, you waited for that song to come on, and, you know, maybe you'd hit record on your high-speed dubbing and pull it down to tape. But you didn't have you certainly couldn't bring up Netflix and choose which episode you wanted to watch, and yet it was easy to imagine a time back in the 80s when something like that might exist. You know, I could imagine that there was all the TV stations had copies of the shows that they were going to play, and how do we get access to that? Well, this is the answer, and technology is the answer. It will unlock that access to that information and that knowledge. And so, for me, my phone has probably 2 or 3 dozen apps that I use regularly. I'm transferring money internationally. I'm staying connected to family. I'm contributing to investment opportunities. I'm participating in charitable donations. All of this is facilitated through a tiny little bit of black glass and metal in my pocket. Now, I still don't think humanity has really understood the power that can lead to. And I think that projects like The Difference will reinforce that over time, and then it will be my children's generation that have only known this to be the case. And we'll see a generational stepwise increase in what their expectations are. We see this, I think, with millennials and the positive and negative traits that sort of get associated to them. And I think one of the nicer ones that I like is the understanding that they're much more focused on experiences and opportunities than they are collecting possessions necessarily. I think the nomadic lifestyle of spending 6 months in Bali and bumming around and working on your startup or whatever it is you're doing, that stuff was just never accessible. And technology unlocks that. I think it'll be interesting to see what a generation that's growing up thinking about ways to participate in their communities and their networks and their groups, I think what they do with technology will be extremely interesting, because I think we're still looking at it. I'm still looking at it from the perspective of almost 40-year-old guy who had this technology introduced to him, not didn't have access to it from the beginning. So I think that for me the underpinning sentiment here is access, and the devices, the software, the networks that they connect to. They all facilitate access.
So where do you think the startup industry will be in 10 years, and how do you see it affecting future developers and entrepreneurs?
I think in the next, so I think 10 years is probably too short a time frame for us to see like a radical major development. I think there's some interesting stuff that's happening with quantum computers that might call into question some privacy concerns. The levels of encryption that we're using today may not cut it in a few years' time if we have access to quantum computers. But then again, maybe not. I think it's the same with AI. We're still very much I'm still very much on the fence as to whether it's a good or bad thing, and I think a lot of the concepts have been around for many years, for decades, but now we've got access to computing resources that mean some of these ideas can be implemented and tested, and we've got data sets to train these models. So I think we're at a precipice in technology, and I think that in the next decade the idea of there being a technology industry will probably reduce. It'll just be the increased proliferation of technology across all industries. And then the impact that has on humans will be, I think, quite significant. Even concepts like universal basic income, the idea that if our basic needs of food and shelter are taken care of, what do we do with our day? And I think that there will be some good answers to that. And I think some of those answers will be charity focused. When people are not obligated to go out and make their money to have their things and live their life, what is it they want to do? How do they want to help their communities? And I think that the boomers are probably looking at this with a selfish mindset. And I think my advice to them would be don't limit the younger generations by your own thinking.
Yeah, look, I think for me it's hoverboards, actually. Hoverboards on Mars, that's my future. I think now that we'll have a couple of generations, I think 10 years is too short, but a couple of generations that are used to what technology brings as well as the benefits that technology offers will really maximise the potential of it. I think the most exciting thing is that the use of technology will be for the greater good of the world, whether it be in environment or charity or convenience or socially or community. All of those things, I think people will kind of change a mindset of, it's a refocus of not trying to extract as much money or, out of the potential as possible, but how we can have a greater living standard or standard of life or happiness. And I think that will make for a better place, a better world. I think we've had those struggles with technology maybe being a little bit naive of what the outcomes are going to be. I think that thoughtfulness of here's the end game, I still think it'll just make ideas and creativity, even more available. I guess that's the exciting thing if you're, just coming up in the digital age. It's like, how can I kind of harness that to come up with something really, really cool, be able to do it from my bedroom, but also, kind of send it out to the globe and watch people kind of take up and adopt and, make the world better for it.
Well, it was so lovely to have you both on the show, The Difference podcast.
Thank you.
And thanks, Zara.
I guess if you're listening out there, you can come to our website and basically sign up for our mailing list and become one of our first beta users and test it out. Tell us what's wrong with it. Tell us what you love about it, and just stay connected on the podcast and through blogs and through our social media. We've got an interesting lineup of guests coming up for our next few sessions, so make sure you stay connected. We're going to be talking about some of the biggest picture things that we're facing as a community and as individuals. So keep up to date by subscribing to The Difference podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Make sure you follow us at The Difference Org on Instagram, at The Difference_org on Twitter, and wearethe.difference.org on Facebook. You can also visit our website, the-difference.org. Once again, thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.